I pulled into my father's driveway, and before I even killed the engine, I knew something was off. There it was, a brand new padlock sealing the door. Floodlights were glaring at me as if I were the trespasser, not the person whose family had built this house. His belongings were stacked on the porch, completely soaked, like they'd been tossed out overnight. It hit me then this wasn't just a house anymore, it was something else, a battlefield. And then she showed up, the HOA president, clipboard in hand, flanked by a security guard who looked like he'd been on the clock for too long. She spoke as if the house already belonged to her. She barely spared a glance at my father's death certificate, which I was holding up in the pouring rain. "This property has been reclaimed by the community," she said, tapping her clipboard with that smug little smile. The audacity! Inside the workshop, everything my father had built was gone. Every tool, every memory wiped out. I stood there in silence, but I didn't just leave it there. Weeks later, I finally told the whole community what had happened, what they allowed to happen in their name. The crowd was silent. They didn't know the truth. And then the agents came, handcuffs snapped around the woman who thought she could control us all. That moment. It was when the power shifted. My father's home, once a target, became evidence. That Friday night, I pulled up after 5 hours on I-77, the only fuel I had left being gas station coffee and the keys to a dead man's house. The gravel driveway was all too familiar, but something wasn't right. I could feel it before I even turned off the engine. There was that padlock, an industrial-grade one this time, gleaming in the headlights. The porch light was gone, replaced by some motion sensor floodlight that practically blinded me when I stepped out. It felt like I was the intruder. Then I saw it. The cardboard boxes stacked along the porch. My father's flannel shirts were folded on top, the red one he wore every Sunday, the green one with the patched elbow. All his things, his memories abandoned like trash on the curb. And attached to the door in a plastic sleeve was a laminated notice. A property seizure notice from Ridgewood Pines Community Association. I stood there in the rain with my father's keys in hand, and they didn't fit anymore. Let that sink in. The keys to a man's home, a home he built with his own hands, no longer worked. Because someone decided his death was an opportunity. As I stood there reading that notice in the rain, the headlights pulled in behind me. A white Cadillac Escalade, polished to perfection, parked right behind my car. Blocked me in. Not an accident, a power move. The kind of move someone makes when they want you to know that they own the conversation before it even starts. The driver's door opened, and a wave of perfume hit me like a punch, floral and heavy, like it had been marinating in a department store for too long. She stepped out dressed in a camel-colored blazer, carrying that clipboard like it was a weapon. Behind her was a bouncer of a man in a black polo, hands clasped in front of him like he was standing guard at the gates of some club that didn't card. She didn't introduce herself, didn't ask my name, didn't even say sorry for your loss. No, she just approached me smiling like a car salesman and started talking like I was some stray dog in the wrong yard. "Honey, this property's been reclaimed by the community," she said, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "You should have read the bylaws before you let the fees pile up." I looked at her. I looked at the guard. I looked at my father's shirts getting rained on, and I said, "My father died 6 weeks ago. He was in hospice. What fees?" Her smile didn't falter, just tightened at the corners like a rubber band stretched a little too far. And she tilted her head as if she thought she was being charming, but it only came off as cruel. "I don't make the rules, sweetie. I just enforce them," she said. I reached into my glove box and pulled out my father's death certificate. I'd been carrying it everywhere, banks, the DMV, insurance offices. Everywhere I went, I had to show the world he was gone. I held it up in the rain, the ink already starting to blur, and asked her, "What kind of person seizes a dead man's home while his family is still burying him?" She glanced at it. Just a quick flick of her eyes, and then she looked away. "The board's decision is final." That was when something inside me shifted. Grief didn't go away, it never does, but something harder, something colder moved in behind it. She had no idea whose cabin she had just stolen. She had no idea who I really was. Have you ever had someone take something from your family that can't be replaced? Something you can't ever get back? I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story, it's just getting started. Let me back up and tell you who I am. My name is Jamie Hollis. I'm 52 years old and I work for the federal government, specifically the Department of Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD. My job is simple compliance auditor. I spend my days buried in spreadsheets inspecting financial disclosures and catching people who cheat the system. It's as thrilling as it sounds, but it also means I know exactly what fraud looks like. I can smell it coming, like a dog smells a storm on the horizon. At the time, I was on bereavement leave. My mom passed years ago. No siblings. Just me and my dad. And now just me. I hadn't slept through the night in weeks. I was driving back and forth from D.C. to North Carolina, dealing with the estate closing accounts, doing all that ugly paperwork that death demands from the living. The only thing keeping me going was that promise I made to my dad from his hospice bed. I promised I'd take care of his things. I'd take care of the cabin. That was the plan. But I didn't expect this. My father, Earl Hollis, had been a county surveyor for 34 years. He knew every property line, every easement, every creek bed, and every right-of-way in the region. Most people didn't know that my father was the one who surveyed the land that would eventually become Ridgewood Pines. Before there was a single house, before there was an HOA, my father was the one who walked that land, measured it, mapped it out. And in 1987, a full year before the first model home was built, my father bought his parcel. A year before anyone had ever heard of Ridgewood Pines. He didn't move into Ridgewood Pines. Ridgewood Pines moved in around him. He was there first. But they didn't know that. They didn't care. And that's when I knew they weren't just stealing from him. They were stealing from all of us. But they messed with the wrong family. When I started digging, it didn't take long to figure out who Denise Keller was. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was the puppet master. Ridgewood Pines wasn't a community to her. It was a franchise. She ran everything and everyone in her path knew it. Her husband, Phil Keller, sat on the county zoning commission. Her brother-in-law ran the landscaping company. Her daughter worked as the HOA property management consultant, a job that hadn't even existed until she graduated college. And that's when I found the rot. Denise Keller had turned that community into her personal ATM. It wasn't just about the fees. It was about control. It was about power. I started digging into the HOA's finances, and what I found made my blood run cold. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just financial fraud. No, Denise Keller had been operating like a queen in a fiefdom, taking what she wanted when she wanted and crushing anyone who stood in her way. When I started exposing what they were doing, people began talking. People began coming forward, revealing how Denise and her family had been running a protection racket under the guise of an HOA. The stories were heartbreaking, but they were also empowering. The more people I talked to, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting for my father's property. I was fighting for everyone in that neighborhood who had been too afraid to speak out. But the tipping point came when I discovered the original Ridgewood Pines HOA covenant from 1986. I went through those property records, and there it was, Lot 0, Block A, my father's parcel explicitly excluded from the HOA's jurisdiction. The very land Denise Keller thought she owned had never been part of the HOA to begin with. So I fought back. Hard. And the day I walked into that community barbecue and took the microphone, I laid it all out. Every dime Denise had stolen, every lie she'd told. And when the FBI agents walked in to arrest her, it was like the entire community had been holding its breath for years, and now they could finally exhale. Denise Keller went from running the HOA like a monarchy to sitting behind a defense table in a federal courtroom. And in the end, she lost it all. Not just her position, but her freedom. But the real victory wasn't about watching her fall. It was about the people who finally got their lives back. The elderly woman whose husband's tools were stolen. The veteran who had his wheelchair ramp torn out. The family who had been fined for a basketball hoop while other hoops stood free. I sat on my father's porch that night, the one he built with his own hands, and I realized something. We'd won. And for the first time in months, I felt at peace. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Subscribe, because there are more stories like this and more people who need to hear them. And if you know someone being bullied by someone like Denise Keller, send them this video. Sometimes the thing people need most is to know that someone fought back and won.